everyone. My name is Mark Vina, and welcome to the SmartTechCheck podcast, where we cover all tech topics that are smart home automation, security, and console gaming related. We pretty much discuss anything that's consumer tech topic related. Today is Tuesday, April 6, 2021. Baseball season is off to a great start. For a lot of people, they're excited to watch baseball again. My Yankees are 2-2, as I was corrected a few minutes ago from one of the podcast folks that you'll be listening to shortly. But without any further ado, let me bring them up on the screen here so you can see their smiling faces. And with a magical click here, I've got here Stewart Wolpin, Rob Pegoraro, and John Quain. You guys are on mute, so you'll have to take yourself off the mute button. And Stewart, we'll start with you.
Stewart Wolpin. I'm a longtime technology freelancer. Been covering CE since the early 80s, and I am the kind of, sort of unofficial historian for the Consumer Technology Association.
Very, very good, Stewart. And you didn't really imply that you're that old, but we all know differently. When I see your vaccine credentials, that tells you how old you are and if you've had the vaccine or not. Rob, who are you? I've never met you before, so I'm glad you just.
I just showed up here. I'm Rob Pegoraro. I'm a freelance tech journalist based outside of Washington, D.C. You can find my work in such places as Fast Company, USA Today, Forbes, Wirecutter, and many other quality publications. I'm also a Washington Nationals fan, enjoying our belated home opener, which started with Max Scherzer coughing up a home run on the first pitch of the game. Go Nats.
I like the way you said quality publications versus low quality publications. It's nice.
It depends on the rate,
John, who are you?
Good to see everybody again. I'm John Quain. I write for the New York Times and Tom's Guide and Gizmodo and AARP, and I cover everything from cybersecurity all the way to automotive technology and transportation. So I cover the whole gamut, and that's CES used to be twice a year. So I'm old enough to remember when it was twice a year. So not quite. It's not 50 years. Just saying.
And, John, you've always fooled me. You told me you were 29 years old. So,
Right. Exactly.
I know it's the hair product you use that just makes you look a lot.
Just reverse those two numbers.
Well, let's not waste any time here. Let me pull up my little topics panel here. And that will come up in a second here. I'm going to add that to the screen here. And a lot of interest. This is going to be an interesting podcast because there's a lot of interesting topics here that I'm going to be actually very curious to see what the opinions of certain folks are on some of these topics. But without any further ado, let's hit the first one, and that is Google beats Oracle. Really, Larry Ellison. The reason why I say that is that as a lot of folks probably know, over the last day or so, there was an interesting Supreme Court ruling. I'm going to let Rob start the topic off and explain exactly what was decided, so then I can attack him after he explains what his decision is. But Rob, why don't you give us kind of an overview of what the big announcement, what the big Supreme Court decision was all about?
Yeah, this ruling that came out Monday ended a very long-running case, which started with Oracle alleging that Google infringed copyright by re-implementing what's called an application programming interface when it essentially created the Android operating system. Google wanted to make it easier for programmers who used the Java language that Sun developed and then Oracle owned when they bought Sun. And that is something that is done all the time in software development. You want to make things easier, you reuse someone else's framework. You're not copying the code that does the work. You're copying how you tell a program to tell another program to provide a function. Super common, and until this case came around, nobody was making a case out of it. It went back and forth multiple times. First, there was a federal court where the judge actually taught himself Java and said, you can't copyright this API at all. There's no case here. Boom. Oracle appealed. And because they'd started by throwing in some patent claims, this eventually got kicked up to a court in DC called the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, which long ago lost the plot and basically has yet to meet an intellectual property claim it didn't like. After appeal and further appeal, I'm really simplifying this, it finally went to the Supreme Court, and the court held, they said, let's just take the simplest way to look at this. Is it a fair use for Google to re-implement these few Java APIs to make things easier And the court said yes, 6-2 ruling. The only two that dissented were Alito and Thomas. Yes. So, you've got Brett Kavanaugh and Sonia Sotomayor agreeing on things. I think we can say this is a nonpartisan ruling.
Can you
Has
imagine?
it stopped a lot of people in D.C. from kind of losing their minds and saying, this is a giveaway to Google, blah, blah, blah. Saying Google wins is, I think, fundamentally inaccurate, because if Google had lost, they'd be fine. They got lots of lawyers. They got compliance resources. Startups, anyone who relies on code, who has to, depend on some other company's API, they would be in a lot of legal jeopardy. So the court did the right thing.
Okay, before I express my opinion about that, I probably have seen the body language that I'm not sure I would use the phrase they did the right thing. But anyway, John, please opine.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I agree with Rob. Look, this is one of these ridiculous cases. The entire software business, everything, everybody uses APIs. That's what you do, right? In fact, they're all supposed to be shareable in a way, and nothing would work if you didn't do that. Literally nothing would work. So it was a ridiculous case to begin with. It's also to give you a sense of how much of Java they actually used here. It's about 0.4%, yep, the entire code of Java. And also, I'm just saying, Java is not one of the most respected pieces out there right now anyway. So it's not like, they were just making it work with everything. So it was one of these ridiculous cases. Why on earth it even got this far is just a big waste of time. Rob's right. Look, if Larry, who I respect as a sailor, but not so much as a CEO, right? Great sailor, not so much CEO. Look, if they had won, it would have been disaster for everybody. Forget about startups. Just like, it would be a nightmare. So it was just a ridiculous thing to begin with. So finally, something went right in one of these decisions.
Well, the only thing I will say before we get to Stewart is that the code that was copied, and I agree with you from a percentage standpoint, it's a very small part piece of code. It was verbatim stolen. It wasn't, a lot of times when code is borrowed, I'll use that phrase generously, so the person who's doing the borrowing will try to make some type of modification to it to kind of to make a case that the code is theirs. But in this case, the code that was copied verbatim. And I'm not sure I'm not completely. Hey, listen, I am not a big fan of Larry Ellison for a whole bunch of different reasons.
Is anybody, honestly?
Well,
he's a really good sailor. He's a nice guy as a sailor.
That's a different podcast. But I think that this opens up the door. And I think that you saw that the dissent by Alito and by Thomas, that this could open up the door for other types of claims, even on non-API code. And I agree with it. Without the API, you can't get applications to work. Right. But if the person who wrote that content can't be properly compensated under patent law, a lot of wacky things could happen down the road. It could be a lot of unintended consequences. That's all I'm just a bit concerned about. But maybe I'm alone in that. You guys feel obviously that's not a problem. But Stewart, what's your thoughts?
Well, several topics today are going to hinge on the law. And as we well know in the Technology Center, the law lags 10 to 20 years behind the technologies that they're trying to regulate. And on top of that, you're working with legislative bodies who, by and large, don't understand technology. And in this particular case, I think if I read the decision correctly, the court decided on using the fair use doctrine.
Yes.
In many other forms of media, the fair use doctrine is very minutely and precisely defined, which means you can use somebody's videotape if you only do 10 seconds worth of it or something along that line. When you play a song on television, as long as you don't play more than 10 seconds or 5, whatever it is, you don't have to pay royalties to BMI or ASCAP. In this case, there is no fair use case law for computer code. And so for the court and the court has said there's no law on this, which is why they decided the way they did. There is no fair use laws or rules that have been legislated that allow the court to hang a decision.
Stuart, there is now.
Right.
No, I don't know that the court actually decided on that. Can only be decided by the legislature. I think they decided in this particular case, but I don't know if this rule is going to be precedent or binding on future cases. And this is the whole
Supreme Court. You can't get more binding than that.
No, yes, you can, because a lot of decisions from the court, if you read even some recent decisions, they very narrowly decide cases based on only particularly set of circumstances, and they often state that this is not binding or precedent broadly, but defined only in this case. This is the way that the court gets out of setting or becoming what the legislature should be, or what people like to say activist judges of setting the law. So I think in this particular case, I haven't read it closely enough to know whether or not the court has said this is binding, or whether or not they're calling on the legislature to actually set what the fair use doctrine would be for computer code. And how anybody is going to decide that, especially a Congress who has a hard time figuring out how Facebook makes money, it's just going to be on me. And this is going to come up, by the way, in the next topic that we have, the same exact issue of the court not wanting to set the rules of the road and only deciding very narrowly based on a very specific set of circumstances.
So I did read this from top to bottom, and Breyer's opinion, I think it is pretty sweeping that fair use is going to cover pretty much any reimplementation of an API. Again, not code that does the actual work, right, but using someone else's framework. The analogy he uses at one point is the Dewey Decimal System as an organizing structure for a library. I've compared it to, you're not copying the entire Lego block. You're just reduplicating the bumps on it that help Legos click together. And in a sense, it's returning us to where we were. The judicial activism was the judges in the lower court, the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, who decided, let's make up an entirely new form of intellectual property that has never before existed. And I think we can kind of all agree that their solution would have upended a lot of existing precedents, norms, whatnot. It would have created a lot of more work for lawyers, which I don't think the software industry needs at all. And in this case, the court could have gone further and said, there's no copyright here at all. The same way you can't copyright a recipe, which is a list of instructions and a list of ingredients. They'd say there's no copyright in an API, another system of organization. They didn't go that far, and that's what some people wanted them to do.
It also would have played hell in the consumer marketplace, because all of a sudden everybody would have restricted what their products could be compatible with in order to not get sued.
Yeah. The whole history of personal tech would be vastly different if we'd had this ruling come down the other way in 1980. Do we even have the IBM PC in that case?
Right. Well, but the only thing I want to say about this, and then I want to move on to the next topic, is I just wonder, just the way we phrased the topic on the slide here to the right, is that it's interesting how the media reacted to this, because they reacted to it, I think, in the way that this topic was presented to me when I posted it on the slide, and that is this more about Google versus Larry Ellison versus the case law about the topic itself. I almost think the media kind of celebrate, regardless of how you feel about Google, it's nice that we
Google, Oracle, it's good SEO.
It's always about wins and losses. It's always, that's what it's about to get the headline.
You can hate Google and still like this ruling.
Yeah.
You can still hate Google, but still like the ruling. I'm going to get a T-shirt for Rob that says that. Okay, more Supreme Court fun. The Facebook topic. I think I'm going to tee this up for Stuart, because I know that you have some interesting views on that.
Well, again, the court decided very narrowly based upon what the definition, again, the ruling on this was that apparently Facebook was calling people to check on their security accounts, and somebody sued them under the Robocall Act.
Yeah.
And the court decided for Facebook, because the Facebook was not using the exact methodology, which apparently nobody is using, for robocalling, which is accessing lists and doing auto dialing. And because Facebook was not doing that, under this very narrow ruling that they said that Facebook was not in, they were sued for the wrong thing, essentially. And what the court said was there is no legislation that covers this particular circumstance. There is nothing in the law that says they can't use this methodology of reaching out to people and then so send it back to Congress to come up with new Facebook robocall rules of the road, so they can't do that. So again, it's a narrow ruling based on this particular circumstance. It decided on the fact that the set of rules that Facebook was sued under do not apply, even though all of us logically would think they're bothering us at dinner time. It's pretty much the same thing as a robocall.
Right.
And that pesky little thing called the law, actually, someone actually looked at the law and applied it very narrowly, you know. But again, you know, I want to get John's opinion on this. I almost get the feeling that because God knows Facebook has a lot of detractors, many of which are on this call. The question is that is the atmosphere so anti-Facebook that even though the decision may have been, ruled accurately because of the very narrow interpretation of the law itself, that, oh, you know what, at a macro level, at the end of the day, it's really does the implementation of how a robocall is conducted. Is that material to really what the intent of that lawsuit was all about? So, you know, you get into that kind of that kind of quagmire. John, what's your thoughts on that? Are you disappointed in the decision?
I'm definitely disappointed, but I also think, gee, if you're silly enough to give Mark Zuckerberg your phone number, hey, you kind of deserve to get called whenever, all right? I mean, that even the birthday thing, that I don't understand. Most of my friends have fake birthdays on there and reply to thanks for the fake birthday wishes and stuff. That's just not something you should do. You know, they should not have your phone number. But be that as it may, I'm totally disappointed because the whole point, as Stuart just alluded to, was don't bother me. You know, I don't care if it's the Chinese consulate or if it's a warranty for the automotive, you know, the car I have, or Mark Zuckerberg calling to check on Facebook. Who cares whether that's not my business? It's his business. So the fact that they were able to do that just seems wacky. Of course, it's the same thing. Why isn't it the same thing? Because it's a special business, Facebook? No. It's exactly the same thing. So I don't get it.
John, you're breaking my heart. That they're actually fake Facebook profiles. That's a news headline. I didn't know that people actually put fake information in their profile in Facebook. I did not know that, and I will take that into consideration next time.
No, it's even better. They even say thanks for the birthday wishes when I know it's not their birthday, right? And they'll have 150 birthday wishes. Yeah. It's just amazing. Anyway,
you don't have to be an Inspector Clouseau to figure that out. Rob, your incredibly legalistic view on this. I'm sure you.
So I have to admit here, I did not actually pull up that particular ruling, but as I recall from reading about the decision at the time, the court said, well, the law defines a robocall in this way. We have to stick with that. If Congress wanted to define it another way, they had plenty of chances to do it. And so in that sense, you know, yeah, I would say that the real problem here is not necessarily that, you know, people gave their numbers to Facebook and then Facebook called them. It's that Facebook said, give us your number for two-step verification for security. And then they said, without actually telling people, we're going to use that as a marketing signal as well. Right. They did get slapped on the wrist by that for that by the Federal Trade Commission. But overall, this is a case where, you know, yeah, the law doesn't actually address that. You know, I wish actually the court had been more literal in past cases. I'm thinking of Aereo, the service that said, if we let you rent an individual TV antenna in a warehouse, we'll then beam that to your house, which actually was legal under the letter of the law. The court said no, because, well, that looks like cable anyways. And Justice Antonin Scalia had a great dissent, which basically said, loopholes exist for good lawyers to exploit. If you don't like it, go fix the loophole. Don't make us do it.
Well, I think going back before we go to the next topic, going back to Stuart's point, I mean, the fact of the matter is that the courts and the Congress, by the way, tend to be years behind where technology tends to be. And anybody who's watched any of these congressional hearings, some of the questions that gets asked to the the heads of Google, Facebook, and Amazon. You roll your, and we're in the business. Obviously, we see we're up to snuff on all the key tech topics. But it's just amazing to me, just the lack of sophistication in terms of some of the questions we're asked. So I'm not surprised sometimes that you see this kind of behavior at the court level, because and by the way, courts have a much more leisurely opportunity to look at the issues in a much more long-term strategic light. So there's probably less of an excuse, but at the congressional level, I absolutely agree with what Stewart said. Now, Stewart, this isn't. It's gonna be hard for me to opine on this. Because I want to see this. I have not seen it yet. You scared me when you brought this up as a topic, and you're scaring me even more. Maybe I have to cancel my HBO Max subscription. But let's talk about this, because it has this program, Q Into the Storm, has been pretty popular, and it has actually gotten a lot of it's generated quite a bit of noise. So talk to us about it.
Well, I've only watched the first 3 episodes so far. It's sometimes a little difficult to get through because the documentarian tends to wander a bit. But essentially, he lays out not only the history of the QAnon movement, it's all online, but he talks about where the social media sites, starting with 2chan, then to 4chan, and then to 8chan and Reddit, and how all of those things sort of gave birth to what is now known as 8chan or 8Kun, Kun. And it apparently all started with this one guy who married the anonymity of, I'm not sure I'm going to get this right. He married Reddit to 4chan. One of them allowed anonymous subtopics, and the other one was moderated, and he sort of married them and came up with 8chan, which allowed complete anonymity, which turned 8chan into this hellscape of very bad things. All the worst things that you could think of that people might post ended up on 8chan. And this is where Q started. And he tells the story of Q. It started with one guy, apparently got sold to somebody else, and he reveals who Q actually is. And it's apparently this father and son team who live in the Philippines and or Japan. You'll watch it. There's news stories already, so I'm not really giving anything away. But for me, the guy who originally started 8chan, a guy by the name, I think his name is Fred Brennan, he's severely disabled. And he sold it because he didn't like what it was becoming. And during the course of at least the first 3 episodes that I've seen so far, he even says that somebody's got to step in and do something about this. He did it because he was in favor of free speech. But even now he thinks that this is the illogical conclusion of free speech. And it's a little scary what is out there, how people are thinking, what they're willing to pose even anonymously, and what free speech is essentially, this kind of free speech essentially with QAnon has done to our political society. So it's scary on so many levels, and it harkens back to the whole legal thing. How does the government deal with the issues of both free speech and the idea of these privately owned bulletin boards, which is sort of like a supermarket putting up a bulletin board? The supermarket owner gets to decide what's on the bulletin board and what isn't, as opposed to newspapers that are governed by libel laws. So it opens up multiple cans of worms in terms of how do you deal with this, and what is who in our country or around the world, who are we neighbors with?
John.
Yeah, look, I've got friends who have sent me a lot of links about vaccinations taking over our brains and, us being infected with this thing so we can have mind control. And that's all QAnon stuff. It's pretty out there. And trying to explain as a science reporter, how we should position this information so that people don't get these strange ideas, or how to combat against these strange ideas, has been a topic of conversation for a long time, way before QAnon came on. The days of CompuServe and the Well. Back in the Well, celebrities would argue on the Well then, and there was a lot of discussion, should you be anonymous? Should that be even allowed? And I think we're sort of it's just been ratcheted up to, literally a pandemic level. Now, what do you do? So it's a scary topic, and it's also been a threatening topic, before the pandemic too, and covering cybersecurity. If one was to say a certain thing or write a certain article, I won't say what it was about or who it was about, but then the threat was that people would send SWAT teams to your house. Things like that were happening on a pretty regular basis. So it's scary in a lot of different levels.
Rob?
Yeah, so this touches on a bunch of different problems. Number one, this is the whole issue of online anonymity versus pseudonymity. Like, Reddit gets a lot of grief on this front, but what it does have is an effective system of persistent pseudonyms. Like, if you're going to be a jerk, we don't need to know your name, but everyone else will know who you are on that site. You have this karma score that follows you around. And Reddit's management, they took way longer than they should have, but they have cleared out a whole lot of that trash. But then it's like every few years, some idiot thinks, I'm going to launch a startup. It'll be total freedom, complete anonymity, no rules. Stop being an idiot. We've seen this movie before. I mean, I've been on online communities since Usenet was a thing in the mid-1990s. Total anonymity on a large scale doesn't work. The fraudsters, the scammers, the griefers always show up, guaranteed. And this is just the latest chapter of that. Nowadays, we're more dealing in terms of what is the responsibility of other companies that enable this. If you're a Facebook, a Twitter, a Reddit, you should definitely be kicking those people off because they've gone off the deep end. What about more of an infrastructure provider? Do you have a right to an internet protocol address? There aren't great answers to that. One thing I am sure of is you certainly shouldn't be forcing private companies to do business with creeps like the horrible human beings behind 8chan right now.
Right. I forgot one word too. Scientology.
Oh, yeah.
This is kind of like that. And look, it doesn't matter how many people come out of it and explain what it's about and where it's from and all that. It's still there, and it's considered a cult in some countries. It's basically banned in countries in Europe. But here we are,
Yeah, I completely understand where you guys are coming from. What I struggle with, though, is at the end of the day, freedom of speech, while it's not absolute, and it's not that there's limitations, but the courts have ruled that, the famous court ruling that you can't go into a theater and scream fire. There's a fire. There's implications for saying that. You can say it, but guess what? There's going to be implications.
Get arrested.
You'll write a book and make a lot of money. No.
What is this theater thing? Are you saying people would go into an indoor space with crowds and everything?
Call me crazy, but yeah, there are people who will do that. What I struggle with is that and I really do believe that the answer to suppressing bad speech is not suppressing it. It's more. It's that whole line about the answer to it is more free speech. And I do agree with along the lines of the fact that, at least having a little bit of control over where it comes from, the Reddit example that, Rob, that you talked to, I think that, that is a step in the right direction, but at least where it's coming from versus this kind of shotgun thing where there's this void of a world out there with stuff that's so scurrilous. I mean, I don't think most people know of some of the things in the dark web that it's really a bad place. It really, I think I'm being actually, kind by saying it's really a bad place.
Well, I think a lot of the issue, going back to this whole anonymity thing, and I've been thinking about it in terms of history and the traditional media that we all grew up with. If you wrote a letter to a newspaper, letter to the editor, you could choose to not sign it, that you could have it be anonymous, but the newspaper publisher needed to know who you are. Primary Colors was published by, I think, SNS under anonymous. But SNS knew that the author was Joe Klein. Right. So there is anonymity to the public, but the people who were putting it out there knew who you were. And so the answer to this may very well be, or at least somewhat in part of, that you can be anonymous online. But if somebody wants to come after you to sue you legally, the people who have put your stuff online has to know who you are, And if there's a court order because you've committed libel or some other fire in a crowded theater kind of thing, remember, free speech is only thought, not action, which is where that fire in a crowded movie theater comes from.
Exactly.
If you're promoting action, it's no longer free speech. Unfortunately, on things like 8chan and on the dark web, there's action all over the place. We've heard it all recently, talking, which is what the 1-6 prosecutions are all hedging on, is all of this stuff that have been suggested by the people who attacked the Capitol. They were promoting action in their communications, which is not free. The other part of this is private versus government action. Remember, the First Amendment only applies to the government. And the government can certainly make a rule that says you can't let anybody be anonymous or you have to know. That doesn't infringe directly free speech. But if you
since the federal papers were published under pseudonyms,
if you own a bulletin board,
a lot of precedent.
You are not covered by free speech, which is what allowed Twitter to take President Trump out. That's their bulletin board, and we don't want this person on our bulletin board. So there's this private ownership versus government ownership where you're dealing with the First Amendment.
Yeah, we got to get to the next couple of topics, but this by itself could be a podcast easily dedicated to this. And the only thing I'll leave you with, it'll be very curious to see, purely from an implementation standpoint, that if Trump is going to reemerge with some other social media platform, it'll be interesting if there's no carriers that will enable him. How does he get the word out? It goes back to what you said a few moments ago, Stewart. I mean, he could. Nothing stopping him.
He'll call up John Hannity like usual. It's changed.
Yeah, but I think he wants to go a bit deeper than that. I mean, he's looking for a 24/7 type of vehicle, not just to be able to.
What's that?
Well, it's going to be
24/7 of any politician. Much less that one.
Let's see what happens there. All right, before I talk about this new Rome portable speaker that just came out, do any of you guys have portable speakers? I mean, do you have? John, what do you use? What do you use? I'm just curious.
Oh God, I have a dozen or so different speakers. So a lot of different things, from things like the Alexa Tube one. There's some Logitech ones. I like a Klipsch one. Actually, I'm looking right here. The Klipsch is an old favorite of mine that I actually think sounds better than most of them. But yeah, I use a lot of them, although not traveling too much. So, not taking very many speakers.
Well, yeah, I will say, and I'm just going to spend a couple of minutes. This is not, again, I'm not being paid by, I'm not being paid by anybody to promote this. I did get my hands on a sample of this new Sonos Roam speaker, and it's $169. It replaces they had a heavier and bigger model called the Move. And I've always liked Sonos. I mean, the quality's actually been quite good. The audio quality actually is quite good for something in a form factor this small. I've only had it for a few days, but what's neat about it, it will pair with other speakers, so you could buy a couple of sets of these. At $169, it's very, very affordable. But the sound quality in such a small form factor is really very impressive. I mean, this would not become my speaker for my home entertainment system, but I certainly would use this. It has a built-in microphone, by the way, so you can use it for conferencing and things like that. And what's really cool about this is apparently you can use it in. I hope I'm not wrong about this. I think you can use this in depth of water up to 30 feet. So, Rob, in your jacuzzi, which I'm sure it's 30 feet, use that and drop in. But I'm just kind of curious, guys. Do you, Rob, do you use a portable speaker in your day-to-day?
No, we have a few around the house, and they haven't gotten used in forever, because the normal use case is you're having people together in the backyard. Oops, not there yet. But yeah, I mean, your sales pitch has me interested in this. I'm also just impressed at the sort of journey Sonos has made, because when they started, they were selling whole home audio at a really expensive price. And I thought, I'm not the customer for this. Most people are not going to spend that much. But here they're competing pretty effectively against the likes of Apple and Google and Amazon.
Oh, they're a bargain against Apple. I mean, up until recently,
Well, yeah.
that HomePod Mini, but versus that larger HomePod, the original one, which was I think it was over
$50.
Yeah, it was an expensive. And by the way, it had issues when it came out. I mean, I think we've talked about that before. But you're right. You know, Sonos, from a brand standpoint, has always been synonymous to high end, and $169 is not cheap. But it's certainly in a price band that they typically haven't competed.
If people see that and think this sounds like a Sonos, then yeah.
You know,
I mean, it's a good size. I mean, Sonos is, remember, the first mover sort of in this. I remember when they did those first speaker, and I'm like, okay, so it streams Rhapsody, and nobody really subscribes to Rhapsody.
Oh, yeah.
And that's all you do. It seemed like, wow, okay, but now, of course, they had the foresight to see what was going to happen. I was using it just this weekend using Tidal, right? You can do high res audio over the speakers now. It supports that. And they have a DSP in the speaker that knows what some of the shortcomings are of that particular streaming service, and tries to like tweak the sound a little bit. So they're just being a little smarter than your average bear. You're being a little smarter than your average portable speaker. So I think that sort of kept them there. And yeah, I do like them. I do like them. I still have like the B&O Zeppelin, that big, not much portable speaker. Wow. But yeah, it's interesting. I do use the portable ones though. Unlike Rob, I have one in the bathroom. I have a big one in the kitchen. I still have a Braven somewhere in case water spills on it, you know, so I use them all the time.
Well, my guess is at $169, you're probably going to move a few of these, and it has some advanced features. You know, you can move it within the home, and it will seamlessly transfer the music from one device to another device, which is kind of cool. You know, if you've got multiple units in your home. But
will it resist having my cat try to knock it off a surface?
I don't know. I don't think it's cat resistant. So that's not on it. So I'm curious, what do you use? Do you have, is there a
I use this tiny thing in the shower. it's recharging. There's a JBL. I have a couple of Ultimate Ear booms, which I always thought were the top of the market here, and they're much less expensive than the Sonos. You can get a boom for like $130 or even $100, depending upon the size. So the Ultimate Ear booms, I thought, but there are easily a dozen of these from a variety of manufacturers that are waterproof, that sound really good, that pump out bass, that can be paired to create stereo or even surround. So this is not a new product area. I think what Sonos is counting on is to integrate it into their whole home system. Most of these speakers don't do. They don't fit into a whole home system. So Sonos's entree is essentially, you could take it out and use it, but when you get home, you can put it in the kitchen, and now it becomes part of your whole home Sonos system. Right. So it's sort of like an Apple sort of thing. It fits into their ecosystem the way that other waterproof Bluetooth speakers don't.
Well, and back to what Rob said a few moments ago is, you know, your brand is a very important thing. And Sonos does have, like Logitech. Logitech has a very high-end brand association. You'll pay more for a Logitech mouse than you would pay for a knockoff mouse, and you got to be careful in not wanting to give that away. So again, $169 is not inexpensive, but I think that will allow them to get to an audience that, yeah, you know what, for something like that, I would use because of the brand and some of the capabilities that are built into it. The audio quality, I think, is very, very good for a portable unit. But you know, the last thing I would say is that it's always curious to me when I've seen different product shots, not just of this speaker, but other portable speakers that are waterproof, how people will use them in the shower. And I'm saying to myself, you know, the one place you have privacy in the morning is taking a shower by yourself. Do you really want to hear music or hear the news while you're actually in the shower? I guess a lot of people do, but not me. I'm not.
Now count me out of that.
You know,
where else are you going to sing? That's the only place you can sing is in the shower. So
John, you don't want to hear me sing, believe me. And the last thing I want to talk about for a couple of minutes, because it was a curious topic that came up just a day ago. I think it was Kara Swisher did an interview with Tim Cook, and he, you know, said very explicitly that he does not expect to be the CEO. The man is 60, and he doesn't expect to be the CEO in 2031. I mean, you guys know a lot of executives in the tech space. There's not many CEOs that will kind of telegraph their future resignation, no matter how well the company might be doing. So that was kind of curious to me that he would actually signal that very explicitly, knowing that was going to get a lot of airplay, which it has. Airplay, no pun intended. But Rob, any thoughts about that Cook would make that kind of admission so early on?
It's interesting, but I guess less surprising yet, because number one, he is older than a lot of other tech CEOs. And number two, he's not the founder. It's not, Mark Zuckerberg, the company, c'est moi. Sundar Pichai, also not the founder of Google, much younger. So right. Tim Cook is sort of in a unique position. It's who would take his place. Who knows? They've got 10 years to figure it out.
Well, they've got a deep bench, and believe me, I won't say there's jockeying at Apple going on who's going to get that job, but my guess is, given his operations background, Cook has got a plan in place. I mean, there will be one or two people that will be groomed properly. You'll never know until the last moment, because they don't want to spoof the street or panicking that he's not going to be around anymore. And my guess is he wants to deliver one more big thing, and I suspect it will be cars, because of all the rumors. And I think if he announced some type of car project within the next 2 or 3 years, or sooner than that, I think he could say to himself, you know what, I didn't do too bad. I think Jobs would be proud of what he was able to accomplish. John, what your thoughts?
I don't think they have a chance at the car thing, and I'm probably in a minority, but I don't think that's a possibility for them. And I wasn't surprised because, this is after the year of the pandemic. I think a lot of us have taken stock again and thought, what do I really want to do with the rest of my life, or when I grow up or whatever. And I think it's just a sensible thing to him look at it and go, do I want to be here 10 years from now? Probably not. The big surprise was on late Friday was Waymo, the chief executive of Waymo, the self-driving car. He just stepped down out of nowhere. He's 59. He's considered to be, that is the leader in the self-driving autonomous car space. They're light years ahead of anybody else, no question about it. And he just stepped down. That's kind of a shocker. What does that say about where the technology is? Or did he do this kind of thing where he looked at the last 12 months ago? I don't need this. I want to do something else. It's hard to say, how those changes, how it's going to affect some of these CEOs over the next couple of years.
Well, you know what, John, and this, all three of you know this, is that the CEO jobs out here out in the Valley, or you could say that in other industries as well. I don't know how a lot of these CEOs maintain any type of family life, because it's kind of like when I'd like to be the president of the United States. I mean, taking politics out of it. I don't think I would want to be the president of the United States, because you're talking about privacy. Your privacy goes to zero. Every moment of your time is accounted for, and your life essentially gets sucked away. And it's not too much different for the average CEO. So kudos to Cook for signaling that. Although there's a lot of CEOs that like to hang on until the company goes into the ground. Cook's not not like that. Stuart, any closing thoughts on the Tim Cook?
Well, I think it's like all things. You don't know what you've got till it's gone, Cook has done, taking over from Steve Jobs, how daunting was that to begin with? And the fact that he has continued to move the company forward and introduce new product. I mean, nothing is groundbreaking into the iPhone or the iPad necessarily, but to continue that, a lot of people thought that after Jobs passed, that the company was just going to start going down again, like it did after Jobs left, when he was fired. So the fact that Apple has not only maintained but continued to grow, and to grow in a positive way. Listen, not everything they do is perfect, but they have still managed to remain above the whole Facebook, Twitter, stealing your data fray in a way that I find very surprising, and have still managed to expand. This was not an easy job. Now, I think the biggest thing to worry about, I think, for almost everybody who has an interest in Apple, is not who they're going to appoint, But what happens to the stock when he leaves? Because I think a lot of people, when he gets to the point where I'm about to leave, people are now going to start thinking, wait, he's done an astounding job. Is there anybody who's anywhere near as capable of him of running this behemoth? So
I can assure you that the runway for this will be very long. If you recall, Jobs, signaled when he was sick for quite a bit of time that Cook was going to be the heir apparent as COO, and essentially he became the. So I don't think the street was absolutely shocked. They had questions, of course. Does he have the innovation and product skill set to succeed where Jobs was just so intuitively natural at that?
Well, people thought that Cook was a functionary. That's what really, because he came out of supply chain, and how boring is supply chain. So a lot of people thought that he was a mere functionary and that things would just continue chugging along. And the fact that the company has just continued to blossom under his leadership, I think took everybody by surprise. But I think you're right. I think that he will be smart, and he will say, this is the person who will be following me, and there will be a long transition period so the stock price doesn't, drop through the floor.
So the question I have for you, Stuart, are you going to signal? Are you going to be around in 2031?
Well, it's funny that you should ask. I have already made reservations to go to Buffalo, New York in 2024 for the next total eclipse of the sun, which is almost exactly 4 years from today.
Oh, boy.
Or 3 years from today. And I made those reservations like 3 years ago. After the last solar eclipse, I went online to look when the next one is. So in 2024, in early April 2024, I'm going to be in Buffalo, New York. I've made my reservations already.
Well, listen, we're over time right now, and so I'm going to skip our predictions. We'll save our predictions for next week. There'll always be more predictions. Thank you, Stuart, John, and Rob, for joining me for today's podcast. Please follow the podcast on our usual social media suspect partners. That's Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And until next time, have a great week.